إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, and welcome to our fifth hour, the second, I believe, of Ramadan. And also, if we do have some time spare at the end of all of this, inshallah, excuse me, we'll also do some tafsir, inshallah. So let's start with the questions right from the off, inshallah, as we have some. And some quite key ones today. Let me go to the ladies group first, because that will be easier, as we've got quite a number on the gents group. There we go. Where are we? I have to scroll some far back, really, before we get to the last fiqh hour. Any questions which come with regards to menstruation, please, you need to email them to MIWQ menstrualquestions@gmail.com. Okay, that's where they need to go, because we don't answer them on the group. We have a dedicated ABA who deals with those questions. Where are we? It seems there's only one question which I think has come from the sisters group, but I just want to make sure. And I believe that is it. Yes, okay. So the one question which has come on the ladies group is this one. Assalamu alaikum. I hope you are well and in good health, inshallah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. All is good. I wanted to ask, what is the Islamic ruling regarding celebrating occasions such as birthdays, New Year's, Mother's Day, Father's Day, or similar days? Is it permissible to have a simple family gathering, give gifts, cut a cake, or wish someone happy birthday without any haram activities, or should these be avoided altogether? Yeah, I've answered this several times, to be honest, in the past, which I think the sisters not picked up on this. But when it comes to these kind of, fixing these particular days, there's nothing within our tradition as such to celebrate a birthday, to celebrate the beginning of a new year, to celebrate a Mother's Day, a Father's Day, or anything else for that matter, especially if we're going to get together and give gifts, cut a cake, whatever, and say happy birthday, because these are pretty much practices which don't really fit in with our tradition. Not because we don't have them, of course we don't have them, but also because we don't necessarily recognize this as some kind of celebration. Rather, what should happen is they should be, for example, one can say, they can remember their birthday, so to speak, and express gratitude to Allah for giving them another year, have remorse and regret over what they've not done well in the last year, and things of that nature. But it's no real celebration. We don't consider this as a celebration. Similarly, when it comes to mothers, again, we should remember them as often as possible. But of course, if there's gifts which become available around that time of the year, and you buy gifts around that time of the year, avoiding the day itself, then there's no harm in that. But we shouldn't be kind of buying into the philosophy of being a people that kind of celebrate everything. Because it's not in our tradition. We've celebrating has been pretty much limited to key events, a birth of a child, a wedding, the two Eids, things of that nature. That's really where we celebrate. That's really where we become happy. Eid al-Fitr, we're happy because, not just because it's Eid, but because we've put a shift in. We've for 29, 30 days, we've fasted, we've sacrificed sleep, we've sacrificed food, we've sacrificed, our normal day practices in order to do some great worship. And the first gift we get from Allah is the gift on Eid day. And the second gift we will get is obviously on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So these are practices. And I think when you know all these names, it's that we've just got into a kind of culture. And because we got into a kind of culture, then it's that cultural practices that we want to always bring. And as I said, this is not something which practically exists within our faith. And likewise, the concept is somewhat alien in our faith, in our tradition. Primarily, as I said, celebration has to have a cause. So I hope I answered that question for you. That's that. So let's go into the chats where there are some very deep questions this time around. Okay. So let's scroll up to get to the first one. Um, where are we? Okay, there we go. It goes further. And I think that is it, possibly. Yeah. So the first question is this one here. And the question goes, Salam Ufsa, wa alaikum salam. Inshallah, hope you're well. I am Barakallahu Feek. What is the ruling on zakat on stocks and shares? And specifically on the types where it is invested by the firm, used, and not by the individual. Robo-advisor is the industry term. Is zakat applicable on the value of the full fund, or do we take 50% to be on the safe side of the funds and value and then pay 2.5% on that 50%? Obviously, if this firm if it's invested by the firm and not the individual, then the problem that could potentially come up is that the stocks and shares which the firm buys may not be Sharia compliant. So the person does need to advise the firm that's investing on his behalf to say to him that, I don't want the investment to be done in non-Sharia compliant methods. I want it only to be in Sharia compliant. So that's the first thing. Secondly, it depends on for what purpose this person is buying these stocks and shares. If this person is buying stocks and shares in order to hold on to them for a long period of time, and then and kind of benefit from the dividends, then what he needs to do is he doesn't need to give any zakat on the stocks and shares value at all. Rather, he would add his dividends to the rest of his assets on his nisab date and give zakat accordingly. If, on the other hand, he's buying shares in order to sell them, or he's buying stocks in order to sell them, rather than hold them over a long period of time in order to gain from his dividends, so his intention is to sell, then in those cases he should determine the zakatable assets within the stock, within the share, and give zakat accordingly. If it proves difficult to work these zakatable assets, yani he tries and he can't calculate it, then yes, there is a proxy that one can use. And 50% is absolutely on the safe side. Some ulama say around 30% would suffice, but 50% most clearly will suffice. That value of around 30%, that's been determined maybe several years ago now, based on the FTSE, in which the value was taken of several, I don't know how many, but there was quite a significant number of businesses, and from their sort of accounting pages, it was determined what is zakatable, and then an average was taken. So yes, it's an average. Yes, it's by proxy. But ulama have said if the person has no expertise, then he may use that. And 50% most definitely is on the safe side. Next question. Detailed clarification on masjid boundaries on i'tikaf. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I pray you well. Barakallahu feek. I am seeking detailed clarification regarding the definition of the masjid boundary in relation to i'tikaf. As I understand, one observing i'tikaf must remain within the boundaries of the masjid, and leaving that boundary without a valid Shari reason would invalidate the i'tikaf, which is correct, to eat, to visit the lavatory, etc. However, in many contemporary masajid, the structure includes multiple halls, side rooms, offices, classrooms, storage areas, and extensions, which make the issue somewhat unclear. I would be grateful if you could kindly clarify the following points. Number one, what precisely defines the boundary of the masjid for the purpose of i'tikaf? Is it limited strictly to the area originally designated and declared as masjid? Example, through waqf or formal intention at establishment? Or does it include later extensions such as upper floors, basements, courtyards, or additional prayer halls? Number two, in cases where a building contains one main prayer hall officially designated as the masjid, while adjoining side rooms or halls are not formally declared as part of the masjid, even though they are physically connected, do those side areas fall within the masjid boundary for the ruling of i'tikaf? Number three, if the masjid administration has designated only one specific hall as the masjid, and the other attached rooms are not considered part of the masjid proper, would it be permissible for a person in i'tikaf to enter those side rooms? Number 4. Furthermore, is it valid for an individual performing i'tikaf to personally define or intend a broader boundary for himself? For example, considering certain side rooms as part of his effective masjid boundary, even if those areas are not formally designated as masjid. Does personal intention near have any effect in redefining the Shari masjid boundary for the validity of i'tikaf? Number 5, practically speaking, is the determining factor the original founder's intention, the Waqf declaration, official registration, common usage of the space for salah, or combination of these factors? Given the importance of maintaining the validity of i'tikaf, I would greatly appreciate a detailed explanation so that the matter may be understood and implemented correctly. Jazakumullahu khairan for your guidance and time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, let me try to give as detailed response as I can. The definition of a masjid is not necessarily the building that you see, which is called the mosque or the masjid, because the mosque or the masjid is a building, right? And I know you might think, yeah, the masjid technically is the ground, okay? It's hallowed ground. It's kind of, well, let me use the word holy ground, okay? It is designated solely for the worship of Allah. That's what a masjid is, because a masjid, if you analyze the word, means a place of prostration, a place of sajda. That's what a masjid is. The building is irrelevant. If you go to where a masjid is and break all the building, you cannot say, oh, the masjid has gone, because the masjid is still there. It's the ground. That's why, for example, Masjid Nabwi has been, destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt several times, right? But the masjid always remains. So that we need to really understand this, because people do get confused with this, that the masjid is the actual ground. The ground. That is what is masjid. You dedicate that ground, a hallowed ground, for the worship of Allah. That's what you're saying. Now, on this ground, we will worship Allah. After that, you build a imara, you build a building, you build a structure. If you did not build a structure, that would still be a masjid, because the masjid is the ground. If you build a fancy 6-story masjid on top of it, then that ground is still the masjid. Okay, that's what's key. Now, let's just say we build on the ground, which is the masjid, right? We've built on the ground, which is a masjid. What happens now? Anything which is directly above that ground is also masjid, because the masjid is from the earth to the heavens. Once you dedicate a piece of land to be a masjid, then everything between that and the heavens is a masjid. So if you have a 10-story building, then every bit of ground or floor above that piece of earth is a masjid. Right? So if you've got a 10 meters by 10 meters piece of ground, which you say this is now a masjid, and you build on top of that, then the 10 by 10 above it will be masjid, above it will be masjid, above it will be masjid. Even if your building is 50 by 50 meters, and you've got a library in there, and you've got classrooms in there, and you've got lecture halls in there, and you've got shops in there, and you've got lavatories in there, and you've got wudu area in there, and you've got a shoe rack in there, and you've got a little sleeping pod in there, and you've got whatever else in there. So the actual building is 50 meters by 50 meters, but your dedication for the masjid is that piece of ground which is 10 meters by 10 meters. That's why you do not make the dua for entering the masjid when you go in from the main door and take your shoes off, because that's not the masjid. Unless somebody's done something really wrong. That is not the masjid, because you cannot bring filth into the masjid. And obviously, if we're walking in there with our shoes, then that is filth, potentially. The masjid is usually the main prayer hall. And if the administration of the masjid, the management of the masjid, have got their heads screwed on, that's where they will have the dua written. Okay, Allahumma aftah li abwaaba rahmatik, as you step in with your right foot. Now you are in the masjid, and the rules of the masjid apply. I haven't got time to explain the rules of the masjid. Let's just focus on what a masjid is. So I hope that's understood. If, for example, you dig under, so you have a dedicated 10 meters by 10 meters, but you dig under and you go down 3 stories underground. Okay, you go 3 stories underground. That is still masjid. Okay, it is still masjid because it's at 10 meters by 10 meters. So let me reiterate just to remove any doubt. Right from the outset, a group of people gathered money and they bought a piece of land or they bought a building. They then said, we're going to make this into a masjid, or we're going to build a masjid here, depending on what situation they were in. At that time, it was important that they engaged with ulama so that the ulama would advise them and say, okay, you now need to dedicate what exactly the boundaries of the masjid are. So they would say, that's fine. We're gonna design like this. They show the design pictures, and this part is going to be the masjid. That's fine. So this part is now masjid because of the niyyah of the founders. On the other hand, they buy an existing building, so they buy a church, let's say, and they dedicate the main prayer hall as the masjid, but not the side rooms that exist associated with a church, where the priests used to go, or where there was a library or whatever, or a kitchen or whatever. They don't dedicate that as the masjid. So therefore, that is the masjid. Now, in the masjid, the rules of the masjid apply. So, for example, there cannot be sleeping quarters above or below it, because if you are married, okay, because copulation is not permitted in the masjid. So the imam can't have a flat above the masjid where he lives with his wife, right? You cannot have the wudu areas above there. Technically, you can perform wudu in a masjid, but it's not suitable. You most definitely cannot have toilets on any of these floors. It have to be on the sides, because this is najasa. You are not permitted to answer the call of nature in a masjid. It is frowned upon. It is disliked. So therefore, and also women who are in a state of menstruation cannot enter a masjid. Neither can a person, even a man who is in a state of janaba, cannot enter the masjid. So those rules are for that part only. On the flip side, then, is when a person is performing i'tikaf, he can only stay in the masjid, not the big building, which is called Masjid-i Falah, but the part of the land which is dedicated to the masjid. Because, like I said, in the masjid, there is the shurak area. In the mosque, let me use the word mosque. In the building of the mosque, there is a shurak area. There is offices. There is a reception area. There is the toilets. There is the wudu area. There may be a library. There may be a coffee room. There may be places where people gather to chit chat. There may be a community room. Sometimes masajids build ta'ziyat rooms because people want to book out the masjid for ta'ziyat, or side of the masjid for ta'ziyat. Okay, the mosque. I apologize for using those words interchangeably. Right? There could be so many functions going on in the masjid. But then there is one part which is the masjid, which is dedicated, that piece of land, for the worship of Allah. That has laws and rules associated with it. And when it comes to i'tikaf, a person cannot go out of there. It does not matter what he thinks his intention is. It's irrelevant. The only time a person in i'tikaf can leave the masjid is, as it says, if food cannot be brought to him and he needs to go get food. Only those which are his darura asliya. A darura asliya means his essential needs. And a human's essential needs are to go use the bathroom. Those are his essential needs. He has no choice. He is human. Then he has to make wudu because he needs to now pray salah. Essential needs. He needs to eat. Essential needs. But when he leaves the masjid, he must return as soon as possible. He must not dilly-dally around. He must not chit-chat. He must come straight back to the masjid. Okay, so I believe I've answered all of that on here. If not, please do pose anything else you need clarification on. That's good. Okay, according to NASA, Gravity is a fundamental invisible force of attraction that pulls any two objects with mass or energy towards one another. It keeps our feet on the ground, causes objects to fall, and holds planets, moons, and stars in orbit. Do you believe this? Don't answer if the answer is yes, as that is kufr. If you need me to explain how that is major shirk, let me know. Is this true? It's something an ustad told me. Yeah, this is unfortunately a bit of a confusion. When we say that what is the real cause of the earth not falling out of the solar system? That is Allah. What is the real cause of rain coming? Allah. Who is the real cause for children to be born? Allah. So who is the real cause of all things? It's Allah. We don't believe that there's another deity, another thing which brings that about. However, and this is some level of simplicity, however, Allah uses asbab. So very rarely do we see rain without clouds. There are usually clouds in the sky which bring about rain. And then we understand how clouds are brought together. We learn about the, hydro cycle, the water cycle as it's referred to, right? That does not mean that that is done without the will of Allah. Of course, it requires the will of Allah, but there are asbab he uses, there are mechanisms he uses. Okay, like for example, the heat which comes to the earth comes from the sun, but we know the cause of the heat is Allah. Allah brings the heat to us, but he has methods that he applies, which is the heat like the sun. So this is a confused understanding, unfortunately, where a person doesn't understand the asbab of Allah. The asbab of Allah are many, and he uses those asbab in order to bring about and do his work. These are what I call the laws of chemistry. These are the laws of Allah, the laws of physics and the laws of biology. These are his laws. He has said these things will happen in this way, and they happen in this way. And that's why a mu'jiza, a miracle, is when Allah goes against his own laws and he does something which proves to be incredible to the normal eye, like the splitting of the moon, for instance, by a man on earth. That doesn't happen all the time. You try standing next to, pointing your finger at the moon, and let me see if you split the moon. 1 million people can do that. 10 million people can do that. 100 million people can do that. 1 billion people can do that. I very much doubt we're going to split the moon, right? So therefore, when the Prophet ﷺ pointed to it, he split the moon. So we can't say that was the cause. The cause obviously was Allah caused the moon to be split. But the sabab was through, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ. Likewise, when we see Isa ﷺ striking his staff for the dead to rise, then obviously again we say this is Allah was the real cause, but the sabab was that Isa ﷺ struck his staff down. Similarly, when the sea splits for Musa ﷺ, then who was the cause? Allah is the cause of that. But again, there was a sabab. What was the sabab? The sabab was for Musa ﷺ to strike his staff down. Okay. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not need to send Musa al-Islam to Fir'aun in order to call him towards the faith, knowing full well he would reject it. He could have easily sent the message through other means, but he has asbab. Okay. This is how Allah works. So I think this is just a person who's not really fully understanding everything. Question regarding sunnah versus nafal i'tikaf while working from home. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you are well. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I am very well, barakallahu feek. I would like to seek guidance regarding i'tikaf in a situation where a person works from home and has flexibility in their schedule. If someone has the ability to be present in the masjid for extended periods while continuing their work remotely, for example, attending online meetings or completing work tasks from within the masjid, how should they approach i'tikaf in this case? Specifically, if a person knows in advance that during the last 10 days they will still need to attend work meetings, respond to messages, or complete job-related tasks, even though they can remain physically inside the masjid, should they intend the sunnah muakkada i'tikaf of the last 10 days? Or would it be more appropriate in such circumstances to perform nafal i'tikaf instead, in order to preserve the sanctity and spirit of i'tikaf, given that the work-related activities may reduce focus on ibadah? In other words, does engaging in permissible work activities while remaining within the masjid boundary affect the validity or the spirit of the sunnah i'tikaf? And is there a preference between intending sunnah or nafal in such a scenario? I would greatly appreciate your detailed guidance on how best to balance work responsibilities with whilst maintaining the sanctity and objectives of itikaf. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay, I answered in the last question that when it comes to person being in itikaf, then the only things he can do are those what we call al-darura asliya. Right? These are things which are absolutely necessary for his well-being. Sleeping is necessary for his well-being, and he's even permitted to sleep in the masjid. Okay, visiting the bathroom is absolutely necessary for his well-being. He cannot bring that into the masjid, so he may even leave the masjid to do that. Eating food is absolutely necessary for his well-being. So the food should be brought to him in the masjid, but if for whatever reason the food can't be brought to him, then he may leave the masjid in order to get food and then return almost immediately. When it comes to this type, then he is only permitted to engage in some form of transactions or trade, which is absolutely necessary, meaning that he has to do this, otherwise he will not be able to eat, or he will not be able to provide for himself, or out of necessity he needs to provide for his family, meaning he's stuck. Okay, it's a darura asliya, he is stuck. But even in those circumstances, if say he's securing a deal in order to buy some food, so let's just say he's got no money, but he has some earphones or something at home, so he may say to a brother, look, I need to buy some food, I'm here for 10 days, I don't have any money, I will sell you my earphones. Even though he doesn't have his earphones on him. And he says, which ones? The ones I wear. Them, that, no, okay, I'll give you £100. Fine. He gives him £100. He can now, you go use that £100 to buy some food. But if a person who's in itikaf has no need for that, then it is disliked. It is disliked to engage in work. The way this has been described would mean this type of work would be disliked. Really, he should be dedicating his time to the ibadah and the itikaf in general, not necessarily being distracted by work. So therefore, it would make more sense that this person is involved in a nafal itikaf, whereby he can work from the masjid, so to speak, but when he finishes his work, he can then dedicate his time to solitude, to worship, and do what he was supposed to be doing there, rather than the sunnah itikaf. Clarification regarding praying salah on a chair and indicating sujood. Okay, number one, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mufti, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. I hope you're well. I am very well. Jazakumullah khairan. I would like to seek clarification regarding the correct method of performing salah while seated on a chair due to illness or physical difficulty. There are many posts and infographics circulating which show different methods of indicating ruku and sujood while seated. Some show a slight forward bend of the upper body stroke back for ruku and a deeper bend for sujood. Others show placing the head forward more prominently. There also appears to be variation regarding whether one may place something in front to lower the head onto. See pic for context. Arrow pointing down. Could you kindly clarify what is the correct Shari'i method of performing ruku and sujood while praying on a chair? How much should one bend for ruku compared to sujood? Should we use just head or kneel forward with upper body? In this the same for praying on airplanes? Is this the same for praying on airplanes? Is it permissible to place a table, cushion, or object in front in order to lower the head onto for sujood? If a person is able to stand but unable to perform full sujood on the ground, what is the correct sequence they should follow? Given the confusion from various diagrams and posts, I would greatly appreciate a clear explanation so that the prayer may be performed correctly according to the sunnah. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Barakallah fiqh. So first I'll start from the bottom up, so to speak, where the questioner says, I would greatly appreciate a clear explanation so that the prayer may be performed correctly according to the sunnah. That's the key point. As far as I know, the Prophet ﷺ never prayed on a chair. The Prophet ﷺ prayed on the floor. So in circumstances where a person cannot make ruku or sujood, or stand or whatever he can't do, then he should pray seated on the ground. That is the sunnah method. So when the Prophet ﷺ injured himself, he injured his leg, then he prayed sat down. He did not pray sat on a chair or sat on an object, even though it was difficult for the followers to see, as in the Sahaba. So he had Sayyidina Abu Bakr next to him, who would imitate his actions, and the people would follow Sayyidina Abu Bakr's actions because they could not see the Prophet ﷺ. So therefore, if we're going to say the Sunnah, then the Sunnah methodology is to stay on the ground. That is the Sunnah. Like I said, I wanted to start from the bottom up. What we're seeing nowadays is a very strange occurrence which is happening in our masajids, and that is this mass number of chairs. I'm middle-aged. I'm not going to say I'm old. I'm middle-aged, and I've been around a bit. So I've been around for a while, and I've seen over the decades that the number of chairs in the masjid is increasing. Now I scratch my head because I think, well, what's going on? What are the possibilities? One of the possibilities is that we're becoming weaker, and for some reason we can't pray sitting down. I don't see anybody pray sitting down, apart from the nafil, and we'll get to that. I don't see anybody seated on the ground praying. Everybody I see seated are seated on chairs. So I don't think this is because of some physical problem, because I see those very same people walk out of the masjid. They're not on wheelchairs. They walk out of the masjid, so they can't walk. So I don't know what the issue is, what they can't do. Can they not make ruku? Can they not? And some of them I've seen get in a car and drive off. So they clearly have power to press clutches and brakes and be behind a powerful machine and control it and be able to turn their body and everything. So it puzzles me why people are sat on chairs. It does puzzle me, genuinely. It puzzles me. I don't think that there are more injured people now than there were 40 years ago or 50 years ago. I will not buy that. If you'd been in a masjid 50 years ago, 40 years ago, you would have hardly seen any chairs. In fact, I don't believe you would have seen any. I can't recall seeing them back in the day when I was a kid. There just weren't chairs there. I think this has become a habit of people. It's a comfortable thing to do because people, who especially people who are slightly overweight as well, standing is problematic, and even sitting in tashahhud is problematic because your body weight is on your legs, and your legs is taking all your body weight. And if you're slightly overweight, that can be quite painful. So I believe this is a choice. This is not a pandemic of illnesses which is spread across the UK or anywhere else for that matter, where people are now struggling to be able to sit down on the ground, because that is the sunnah. So that's my first point. Okay, my first point is I think we're just going too quick for the chairs, and I see masajids offering chairs as though they're helping somebody. What will our masjid look like 100 years from now? Will anybody stand for salah? Will anybody make ruku? Will anybody make sujood? Because when people are sat on chairs, they don't make ruku. They don't make sujood. They do everything sat on a chair. Right? So that's a big danger, isn't it? Because ruku is fard, sujood is fard, qiyam is fard. And these people are missing 3 faraid. Now, if you're sat on a chair, when you can perform these faraid, your salah is invalid. Your salah is invalid. And I have a feeling that people think the fact that these chairs are there, that this is, a permissible way of performing salah. It is not. It is not a permissible way of performing salah. The sound way of performing salah is to sit down on the floor and perform your salah like that. Not to sit on a comfortable chair, but it's to sit on the floor. So I reiterate, there is a problem here, a big problem. Before I answer the question, there is a big problem here, and I think this will become more and more widespread, where unfortunately 50 years from now, we're not going to recognize it. And when we used to take great pride as Muslims, didn't we? We say, oh, subhanAllah, look at our masajids and look at the churches and look at the synagogues. They have pews in churches and they don't even bow and they don't even make ruku. What kind of worship is this? They just sit down and they read from a book. Really? How long before we have the mushafs in front of us and we read from the mushaf? We're already sitting on chairs. Soon chairs will become a permanent fixture in the masjid. So people will walk in like they are in synagogues, like they do in churches, and they will sit on chairs, on benches, because moving chairs will become a problem. So they'll think, well, let's just make it a permanent fixture. The next person who comes along with a bright idea says, why don't we just make it a permanent fixture? And then it will say, oh, it's too difficult for people to take their shoes on and off. And the only reason why we used to take our shoes on and off is because we used to prostrate on the carpet. Well, we're no longer prostrating on the carpet anymore. So therefore, we can keep our shoes on. So where will we be 100 years from now? How much have we moved in 50 years, as I've said to you? How much have we moved in 40 years? How much can we move in 100 years? How much can we move in 300 years? Don't forget, Islam via the Prophet ﷺ is 600 years younger than Christianity. So give us another 600 years, where will we be? So I think this is a big problem. I really wanted to emphasize that point. So that's number one. Secondly, is the style of chair that we have. Okay, the style of chair. I've seen, obviously, masajids that have like the normal four-legged chair. The problem with the four-legged chair, especially our carpets are very good quality, thick carpets. So when you got the four-legged chair, then because the surface area is so small, it has indentations in the carpet. It damages the carpet, because if you've got a fairly bulky fella that weighs, I don't know, 15 stone, 14 stone, 13 stone, or higher, sat on a chair with four little small legs, then think of it like high heels that women wear. You're putting a large a large weight, a large mass over a very small surface area. And what happens is you get indentation. So it's damaging carpets. So that's number one. Secondly, where should the chair go on the saf? Because that's another problem now, is when people are sat on the chair, their feet, some people then stand up. Okay, they stand up for a little bit, few minutes, and then sit back down on the chair. So when they stand up, their shoulders are not in line with the other muqtadis. They're like about, a yard ahead because of the chair. So when they stand up, they're way out of sync. And the Prophet ﷺ was very keen that he wanted to make sure all the chests were level. So if an archer was to fire an arrow, then it would literally miss everybody's chest exactly the same. No chest it would hit, because somebody's chest was protruding. In this case now, you got this bloke who sat like a yard ahead of everybody. Right? So that's a problem. So if he's going to be sat on a chair, then it is far better for the chair to be, I don't know, my hand looks a bit bent there in the camera. It's better for the chair to be straight backed rather than reclining. Because when the chair is straight backed, then at least the person's back is level, rather than the recline where the chair reclines slightly. So it's actually leaning back a little bit. Reason being is that when we have a person who is ill, Salatul Marid, when he is ill and he's sat on the floor, then he's permitted to have his feet ahead of him, in front of him. At that time, we use his back to be level with the back of the legs of the other men. We don't use his feet anymore. We only use his feet when he is stood up. So when a man is stood up, then we count his feet and we say he's, level with their ankles, level with their hips, level with the shoulders, level with the head, and the chest are all level. But when this person is sat down, then the Sharia permits his feet to be ahead, because where's he going to put his feet? It's better for his feet to be in tashahhud position. That is the most preferred position. But say Khuda na khasta, he's twisted an ankle, and therefore he can't sit on his legs. So he has his legs out in front of him. So therefore, the ulama say that now we use his back, and his back should be straight. So his back is now level with the chap next to him. So he just looks like a short bloke, okay, where his head reaches everybody else's hips. And he's like, so when he's sat down, his head is level with somebody's hip, but his back is level with their legs. So again, he is level. Okay, because we want order. It's just his feet are out in front. Okay, his feet are out in front. Now, there was a few other questions asked. So let me just bring some text that I want to share with you. So we have a key text, which is called Nur al-Idah. In Nur al-Idah, it mentions this. وَإِن تَعَذَّرَ الرُّكُوعُ. Where are my glasses? Okay. وَإِن تَعَذَّرَ الرُّكُوعُ وَالسُّجُودُ. They didn't help at all. All right. وَإِن تَعَذَّرَ الرُّكُوعُ وَالسُّجُودُ صَلَّى قَائِدًا بِالْإِيمَاءِ. If he is incapable of making ruku and he is incapable of making sujood, he should pray sat down. There is no point in standing up if you cannot do ruku or sujood. Right? He should pray sat down. And when we say sat down, we are talking about sitting on the floor. Okay? On the floor, because there was no sitting on chairs. Remember that. This sitting on chairs is a more recent innovation. You could argue it's a bid'ah. It's a more recent innovation. Salla qa'idan bil ima. And we're going to discuss what this ima means. Well, I'll tell you what it means. So I can't keep a secret, can I? So he will pray sat down with indication. We'll discuss what indication means. وَجَعَلَ إِيمَاءَهُ لِلسُّجُودِ أَخْفَضَ مِنْ إِيمَائِهِ لِلرُّكُوعِ. He will make his indication for sajda lower than his indication for ruku'. فَإِن لَمْ يُخْفِضْهُ عَنْهُ لَا تَصِحُّ إِلَى آخِرَةٍ. If he does not differentiate by lowering for sajda his head, then he does for ruku', then this is not sound. وفي الشرح وإن تعذر الركوع والسجود وقدر على القعود ولو مستندا صلى قائدا بالإمام. If he is incapable, if ruku' is impossible, if sajda is impossible, but he has the ability to sit, even if it means reclining against something, right? Then he will pray sat down bil ima, by indication. للركوع والسجود برأسه. For both ruku and for sajda using his head. He's indicating with his head. ولا تجزئه مضطجئا كما في الجوهرة عن النهاية. It's not permissible for him to pray lying down, like it mentions in the Kitab al-Jawhara, from which is citing the Kitab al-Nihaya. وَجَعَلَ إِيمَاءَهُ بِرَأْسِهِ. And he will make his indication with his head. لِلسُّجُودِ. For sajda أَخْفَضَ مِنْ إِيمَائِهِ. Lower than his indication بِرَأْسِهِ لِلرُّكُوع. With his head for ruku'. The key thing to bear in mind here is the indication is only with his head. Okay. The difference, though, is by using his head, the ruku is to one level. For sujood, I've just yanked my amama, right? So he's there, sat straight. When he's going into ruku, it's there. When he's going into sujood, it's there. There is no movement of the back. There's just movement of the head. Stand is his normal position for qiyam, ruku. So literally, he's praying with his head. Because this only reason he prays with his body is when he's able, and he only prays with his body in order to go into bowing and prostration. With his body unavailable, bowing and prostration has been removed from him. And as bowing and prostration has been removed from him, he needs to do something to replace the bowing and prostration. His sitting is replacing his standing, because the only reason we stand is so that we can prostrate. There is no need to stand otherwise. Right? Let's carry on. وكذا لو عجز عن السجود وقدر على الركوع يومئ بهما كما في البحر عن البداع. Similarly, if he is incapable of prostrating, but he is capable of making ruku, he will still indicate for both of them. Listen to that again. If he is incapable of making sajda, but he is capable of bowing, of making ruku, he will indicate, and when we say indicate biras, for both of them, as is mentioned in Bahar, and that is citing al-Badai. وَحَقِيقَةُ الْإِمَا تَعْتَعُ رَأْسٍ. And the reality or the definition of ima is the movement of the head, or the lowering of the head. Ta'ta is to lower the head. وَرُوِيَ مُجَرَّدُ تَحْرِيكِهَا. And it has been narrated just only the movement of it, meaning no movement of anything else, only mujarradu tahrikiha, only the movement of it, لما قال في البحر, like it's mentioned in Bahr, والشرح المقدسي عن الخانية مريض عجز عن الإيماء فحرك رأسه. So this again is cited some key Hanafi texts, and then he says an ill person is incapable عن الإيماء فحرك برأسه, then he will move his head. And Abi Hanifa yajuz, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, this is permissible. Wakal ibn Fadl, according to Ibn Fadl, la yajuz li'annu lam yujad minhu al-fi'l. Obviously, that's that position, but we leave that. Ibn Fadl says it will not permit him li'annu lam yujad minhu al-fi'l, because we're seeing no action from him. Intaha, meaning end of the topic. فَحَقِيقَةُ الْإِمَا تَعْتَ الرَّأْسِ انتهت عبارتهما. The reality or the definition of ima is the lowering of the head. Solely the lowering of the head. Intahat ibaratuhuma. That's where the citation from both those texts ends. فَإِنْ لَمْ يُخْفِضْهُ أي الإيماء للسجود عنه أي الإيماء للركوع بأن جعلهما على حد سواء لا تصح كما في شرح المقدسي والبحر عن الوالوالجية لفقد السجود حقيقة وحكما مع القدرة. If he does not lower, meaning to indicate for sajda compared to indicating for ruku, in that he makes both of them exactly the same. So he makes his ruku there and he keeps his head there for sajda. Then in that case, it mentioned in the Sharh al-Maqdisi wal-Bahr and al-Falwalajina that he has missed sajda in reality. That's how we consider it, that he's missed his sajda, and the hukman is based upon the ability he has. Furthermore, let's carry on. In Tanwir al-Absar, which is the sharh of Tumurtashi's kitab, which eventually Ibn Abidin rahimullah did a hashia on Tanwir al-Absar. Okay, Tanwir al-Absar is by Imam Haskafi. وَإِن تَعَذَّرَ أي الرُّكُوع وَالسُّجُودِ, if he's incapable of, if there's an incapacity for bowing or prostrating, أو مَا قَائِدًا, he will indicate sat down. وَيَجْعَلُ سُجُودَهُ أَخْفَضَ مِنْ رُكُوعِ, and he will lower his sajda than his ruku till the end. وفي الدر المختار, Dur al-Mukhtar, okay, which is Imam, the text that carries on, the hashia that's written on there. ليس تعذرهما شرطا, the incapacity is not a condition of both of them. Rather, بل تعذر سجود كافٍ, rather if he's not able to do sajda, that is enough. The ruku is secondary, meaning if he can do ruku but he can't do sajda, then he will do قائدا بالإيماء. وهو أي الإيماء قائدا أفضل من الإيماء قائما لقربه من الأرض إلى آخرة. Then rather than trying to make ruku and then sitting back down again for sajda, he should stay sat down, and that is afzal for him than indicating standing because of his closeness to the earth. Because when he sat down, he is closer to the earth, and sajda is closer to the earth because you make sajda on the earth. So there's no point him making standing up and doing that. وقال ابن عابدين رحمه الله قوله أومأ قائدا, so he will indicate sitting. I think I might have got my names mixed up there. Tanwir al-Absar is by Imam Tumurtashi, and Ad-Dur al-Mukhtar is by Imam Haskafi, and then Ar-Radd al-Muhtar is by Imam Ibn Abidin. So apologies if I said it the other way around. Anyway, قوله أومأ قائدا, he will indicate sat down لأن ركنية القيام للتوصل إلى السجود. He says he will indicate sat down. Why? Why not stand up to make ruku? Why is he still sat down, even though he's capable of making ruku, but he only has a problem making sajda? So Imam Ibn Abidin rahimahullah says, because the necessity of standing is in order to reach to sajda. We start by standing in salah is so we can reach sajda. We want to drop down on our face. And when you drop down, the only way you can drop down is when you start from a high point. And the only way you're going to start from a high point is when you're stood up. Okay, that's why the standing is there. So if you cannot make sajda, then there's no point to stand. Because the whole point of qiyam in salah is, as I said, so that you fall down on your face. But if you can't fall down on your face, then there's no point in standing. قوله ويجعل سجوده أخفض إلى آخره. He will make his sajda lower till the end. أشار إلى أنه يكفيه أدنى الانحناء عن الركوع, meaning it will suffice him the slight movement for ruku. وأنه لا يلزمه تقريب جبهته من الأرض بأقصى ما يمكنه كما بسطه في البحر عن الزاهدية. Let's see what else it goes on. Furthermore, this is some more ibarat from Rad. وفي الشامي يعني إمام ابن عابدين's text. وفي الزخيرة رجل بحلقه خراج إن سجد سالة وهو قاعد على الركوع والقيام والقراءة يصلي قائدا. So there is a person, okay, so he's got some illness, okay, when he goes into sajda, he pushes on his bladder, and as he pushes on his bladder, urine leaves his body. Okay, so he's absolutely fine. He can't go into sajda. If he stands, it's all good. Okay, he can he can perform ruku. Qiyam, he can make qiyam. He can stand and make qira. He can do all of those things. The only problem is when he goes into sajda, his thigh, even though he keeps his thigh away from his body, he pushes against his bladder, which causes urine to leave his organ, which breaks his wudu. Okay, breaks his wudu. So every time he's making sajda, is breaking his wudu. He's never completing his salah. So he speaks to a mufti. A mufti says to him, "You pray sat down, brother. Okay, you pray sat down." Whilst he is able, qadirun ala ruku wal qiyam wal qira, yusalli qa'idan yumi. He will pray sat down by indication. ولو صلى قائما بالركوع وقعد وأومى بالسجود أجزأه. If, however, he still went and stood up and he made ruku and then he sat down and then he indicated with his head for sajda, it would suffice. Yani أجزأه. However, وَالْأَوَّلُ أَفْضَلُ, the first is the more preferred opinion. The preferred opinion meaning that even if you're capable of making ruku, even if you're capable of standing, it is better to stay seated and indicate with your head. لأن القيام والركوع لم يشرعا قربة بأنفسهما. The reason being is standing in salah and bowing in salah have not been legislated as a means to draw close to Allah in of themselves. بل ليكونا وسيلتين إلى السجود. Rather, the purpose is for them is as a means to reach sajda. Sajda is the key. Okay, sajda is the key. That's why we have sajda at the end of each rak'ah. That is the goal of this rak'ah. The goal of the rak'ah is to make sajda. Furthermore, let's see if we can add to it. وفي الدور المختار وهو أي الإيماء قائدا أفضل من الإيماء قائما لقربه من الأرض. We've already mentioned that. Imam Shami says لقربه من الأرض أي فيكون أشبه بالسجود منها. Why? Because it's better staying seated. Because being seated is the close you can get to sajda. Now think of a person sat on a chair. How close is he to sajda? He's about halfway. Okay. Whereas a person sat on the floor performing salah is close to sajda. The only difference is his backside might be on the ground. His back of his thighs might be on the ground. His knees are not on the ground, but it might be that the back of his knees are on the ground. So the only thing which is missing is his knees are missing and his hands are missing and his face is missing on the ground. But some parts of his body is on the ground. But if you're sat elevated on a chair, on a throne, then how are you close to sajda? وفي دور المختار من تعذر عليه القيام صلى قائدا كيف شاء على المذهب لأن مرض أسقط عنه أركان فالهيئات أولى وقال الزفر كالمتشهد كيل وبه يفتى. He should sit in the position of a person who is doing tashahud. Okay, a person is mutashahud, yani a person who's performing tashahud. That is the preferred position to sit. If for whatever reason that causes him pain, that he cannot sit in tashahud, it hurts him, then he may shift his legs to one side. Okay, a bit like where a woman sits, and then he can place his posterior on the ground. Okay, and he can have his legs to one side. If he struggles with that, then he can sit like like with the way we sit cross-legged. He can sit cross-legged if that is required. But the preferred position is for him to sit in a tashahud position. You can't sit in a tashahud position sat on a chair. وقال ابن عابدين قوله كيف شاء meaning كيف تيسر له, like I just mentioned now, if he can't sit in tashahud. لو بغير ضرر من تربع أو غيره, meaning without causing himself harm, even if he sits cross-legged or something else. قوله على المذهب جزم به في الغرر والنور الإيضاح وصححه في البدائع والشرح المجمع واختاره في البحر والنهر. So he just quotes many books that have selected this opinion. فالهيئات أولى جمع هيئة وهي هنا كيفية القعود. قال طحاوي وفيه أن الأركان إنما سقطت لتعسرها ولا كذلك الهيئات تأمل. قوله قيل وبه يفتى. قال في التجنيس والخلاصة والوالجية لأنه أيسر على المريض. It's easy for the sick person. قال في البحر ولا يخفى ما فيه بل أيسر عدم التقييد بكيفية من الكيفيات. It is easier to not qualify this by a mannerism rather to say that he can sit in any way, shape or form. وذكر قبله أن في حالة التشهد يجلس كما يجلس للتشهد بالإجماع. That's how we should say. And when you say in tashahud, your hands are placed on your thighs. They're not placed on your stomach. Your hands are only placed below your navel is when you're stood up. You're not stood up. You're sat on the ground. You're sat on a chair. So why would your hands be tied beneath your navel when you're sat on a chair? That's when you're in qiyam. You can't do qiyam. So you've now been excused from qiyam, so you will always just sit in the tashahud position. And the only difference you're doing here is the ruku and sajda with the head. That's it. There is no other hand movement or anything else like that at all. Right? Obviously, you make takbir tahrima, and that's it now. You just sit. قولوا ينبغي أن يقال إن كان الجلوس كما يجلس للتشهد أيسر عليه من غيره أو مساويا لغيره كان أولى. So what he's saying here is that the sitting we refer to here is that if the sitting of the tashahhud is easier for him than another position, or it is the same than another position, then that is a preferred one. وإلا اختار الأيسر من في جميع الحالات. Then he should just pick the one most comfortable. ولعل ذلك محمل القولين والله أعلم. And that brings that topic to the end. Let me see if there's anything else to add here. قولوا ولا كذلك الهيئات قد يقال سقطت تبعا للأركان لتبية حالها وإن لم يوجد لها مسقط. قولوا ولا اختار الأيسر. No, it's just giving more details to that. And that, I believe, I have covered everything I need to cover on that point. Okay, so we've talked about the movements. We've talked about how they should pray salah. I've told you about the chairs. Similarly, what the chairs should be is the chairs are preferred to be in a separate section. I think for the big masjids, they should have a separate section for people praying on chairs. A separate section. So that at least the safs are right. In some of the masjids I've been to, somebody just props a chair in the middle of a saf. Just props a chair in the middle of a saf. So, and no one's going to stand that close to a chair. So it's going crazy. There should be big masjids should have a separate section for chair people. Like I said, people shouldn't be on chairs. That's the first point. But now, as I say, the cat is already out of the bag. How are you going to put the genie back in the bottle? So I used mixed metaphors there, didn't I? Cat out the bag and genie out the bottle. You can't put the genie back in the bottle now. Pandora's box is open. To educate people now is going to be challenging. Okay. I think I've covered everything. I don't think there's anything there that I feel. There is one other point that I wanted to raise whilst I have your attention. Let me find where I wanted to share that. Oops. I was about to say oopsie daisy. Right. This is about nafil prayer. Okay, you see many people pray nafil prayer. Now forget about the chair. You see many people praying nafil prayer sat down. And they'll also be making ruku and sajda they'll do to the ground, but they'll make ruku sat down. All right, so you'll see them. They'll start the nafil, and this is usually after the witr salah. They'll do the 2 rakats nafil, Allahu Akbar. They'll stay seated. They'll tie their hands around below their navel, even though they sat down, which they should be placing on their hands now. And then when they're making ruku, they'll bend their back, okay? And then when they're making sajda, they'll make sajda on the ground. Right? That is not the correct way to pray nafil. But I forgot one thing. Let me just finish off that other thing. So this is again Radd al-Muhtar. So he mentions here, أقول الحق التفصيل وهو أنه إن كان ركوعهم بمجرد إيماء الرأس. Just to again re-emphasize the point that there is no back movement. Because I've seen some of the infographics and they move the back. You cannot move the back. So he says here, أقول الحق التفصيل وهو أنه إن كان ركوع بمجرد إيماء الرأس من غير انحناء وميل الظهر. He says this is solely by the moving of the head without moving the back. This is what we call ima, not ruku, because you are not doing ruku. In ruku, you move your back. But you're not doing ruku. You are substituting, because ruku you cannot do from a seated position. Ruku you can only do from a standing position, because you go from a standing position to a bowing position. That's how you do ruku. How can you go into ruku from a seated position? You're sat down. Ruku means stood up and going from 180 degrees to 90 degrees. So, and it is permissible, like for a woman, we tell a woman not to go to full, 90 degrees, because we don't have like sharp angles for a woman in her prayer. We say as long as you can touch your knees, sister, and even if that means that her back, her back is only slightly bent. That's exactly how men pray on a chair. How a woman slightly bends her back when she's praying, making ruku. Now, so ruku, remember, let me re-emphasize, ruku can only be ruku can only be done when you are stood up. You cannot do ruku sat down. There's no such thing as ruku when you are sat down. You lose that. You lose ruku. So what you have to do is you substitute ruku with the ima bi ras, with the indication with your head. As soon as the back comes in, that is ruku, and ruku cannot be done in a seated position. Okay, I wanted to mention that last point. All right. فلا يعتبر السجود بعد إلا إيماء مطلقا وإن كان مع الانحناء كان ركوع معتبرا. Because if you make inhina, if you get your back involved, now you are performing ruku and you are substituted the ruku. So how can you do half a ruku and half a substitution? What is it you're actually doing? You're doing ima with the head. It's all you're doing. And you can't do sajda in midair anyway. So when people do this for ruku, I don't know if you can see me. I'm assuming you can see me. So when people are like this and they say, Allahu Akbar, they do this for ruku. Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, Sami Allahu liman hamida, Allahu Akbar. Now what are you doing here? Right? What is this? And they say, well, I'm doing sajda. Well, how are you doing sajda? Your face isn't on the ground. So if you've now substituted both ruku and sajda, then you have to go with the substitute. It's like, for example, you can't use water and you're trying to use tayammum. So you say, oh, you know what? I want to use a little bit of water. I feel a bit bad. So I'm going to make some mud paste and I'm going to put this mud paste on. You're either going to do tayammum or you're going to do wet ablution. You cannot do a mixture of wet ablution and dry ablution. It just doesn't work. If you've been excused to make dry ablution, then do dry ablution. So you can't say, oh, in wet ablution, I also wipe my head, right? In wet ablution, I also wipe my head and I wipe my feet, right? I wash my feet. So I'm going to do the same with dry ablution. You can't. In dry ablution, you have to stick to what's farad in dry ablution. In wet ablution, you stick to what's farad in wet ablution. You can't mix the methodologies. Like, for example, when a person is praying salah, he can't mix ruku and bring it into his sitting down prayer thinking, oh, well, that's ruku. Because, okay, if you're going to do that, then what's your sajda? And if you say, well, my sajda's in midair, so when did you ever do sajdas in midair? If you're saying I can do ruku. So this is, you stay stationary, your back is straight, you have chairs which have an increased surface area. I mentioned this increased surface area, the ones which have a kind of a, like this all the way around the bottom of the seat. So you spread your weight so it doesn't damage the carpet. You have a straight backed seat. This is only if we say pray in a chair. Like I said, my position is you do not pray in a chair. But, if somebody was to twist my arm around my back, the chance would be a fine one. But if they did, so like the big guy, 6 foot something, twisted my arm behind my back and said, no, Mufti, you have to tell us how to pray in a chair, then this is how I would say it. You get a chair which has a structure such without the legs, so that it spreads your weight. That's number one. Number two is that it's straight backed. It's not bent, it's straight, so that all the stuff is complete. Number three is you put the chairs completely away from people without chairs. All right. Number four, if you can stand for ruku and you can stand, but you can't make sajda, then you don't stand and you don't stand for ruku. You stay seated. When you stay seated, you sit in a tashahhud position. So the best tashahhud position you can get now is your legs are down and your hands are on your thighs close to your knees. For ruku, you move your head there about what should we say, about 45 degrees. Okay, and for a sajda, you do 90 degrees. It's not just your eyes, it's your head moves. 45 degrees, 90 degrees, right? And the rest stays the same. None of this, none of this, none of these hands out, whatever, none of this. If you've made yourself mahroom of sajda, then tough. You cannot, that's your loss. And again, I reiterate, a person who can make sajda and doesn't, his salah is not accepted. His salah is not accepted. The only excuse that was given in the kitabs is a person who, when he goes into sajda, urine comes out of him. All right, that was his only reason, that urine comes out of him. So that was a reason given for that person. Okay, I wanted to make a point about nafil salah. Many of us, what we'll do is we'll pray nafil salah after tarawih. I wanted to share some text with you. Okay, so let me see. Listen to this. This is in Imam Kasani's kitab, Badaya Sanai. Okay, it mentions that wal asal. What are my glasses? That's better. Wal asal fi jawaz al-nafl qa'idan ma al-qudrati ala al-qiyam ma ruwiya an Aisha radhiyallahu anha. So the basis for permitting supererogatory prayer in a seated position, even though you have capacity to stand, because you cannot pray seated, as I've just mentioned to you, if you can stand and make sajda. You cannot. And remember, standing and bowing is only a precursor for prostration. So the principle of permitting supererogatory prayers in a seated position with the ability to stand is what has been narrated from Aisha radhiyallahu anha, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kana yusalli qa'idan. The Prophet alayhi salam used to pray seated. Okay, pray seated. This was when he prayed supererogatory prayers, because the Prophet alayhi salam used to pray all night. Not like me and you. Allahu Akbar. That's it. 3 seconds surah and we're down and we're already feeling the pain. The Prophet ﷺ used to pray all night. And when you pray all night, especially as he was aging, don't forget, in Medina, the last 10 years of his life, that was when he's obviously the eldest, in age. And he put some weight on when he aged, alayhi salatu wasalam. So therefore, this is his most, physically tiring period in his life. Hence the reason he sat, not because he was lazy. And remember, he would recite Surah Baqarah in first rakah, Surah Al Imran in the second rakah. Each 2 rakats would take like 3 hours or something, 2-3 hours. So you're gonna tire. But what did he do? What he would do is, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is kana yusalli qa'idan fa idha arada an yarka'a. When he intended to make ruku, qama, he stood up. Faqara'a ayatin, he recited the last few ayats of whatever he was going to do. Thumma raka'a wa sajada. Then he made ruku and then he made sajda. Thumma ada ila al-qu'ud. Then he stayed seated again. He did not go to ruku from a seated position, because you cannot go into ruku from a seated position. He did not go into sajda from a seated position, because as we've reiterated over the last half an hour, you cannot go into sajda from a seated position. You can only go into sajda from a seated position. Inna lillah. You can only go into a sajda from a standing position. So even though the Prophet ﷺ would say Allahu Akbar, and he would now recite Surah Thana, Surah Al-Fatiha, Ta'awuz, Tasmiyah, in the right order, of course, and then he would recite a long surah for maybe an hour. And when he knew he was getting to the end of this surah or whatever he was reciting, I'm just saying this, okay, he would now stand up, recite the last few ayats, stood up, and then Allahu Akbar, go into ruku, and then Samiyallah, Allahu Akbar, go into sajda, and then instead of saying Allahu Akbar after the second sajda and standing all the way back up again, he would say Allahu Akbar and he would sit back down again, and he would start his second rakah. And when he would do his second rakah for another hour before he was going to go into ruku and sajda, he would stand up again, recite the last few ayats before, and then Allahu Akbar, go into ruku. So he did not become mahroom of ruku and sajda. The way we pray nafil now is very, very different than this. Next one. فصل في صلاة النفل جالسا وفي صلاة على الدابة وصلاة الماشي. Okay. ويجوز النفل إنما أبر ليشمل سنن مؤكدة وغير معرفة الصلاة قائدا مع القدرة القيام وقال حكى في إجماع العلماء ولا غير المعتمد يقال سنة الفجر لما قيل بوجوبه. I don't know if this adds anything to it. So basically it says here وكان يجلس في عامة صلاته بالليل. Here we go. Wait a minute, here we go. لأن الصح جواز قائدا من غير عذر فلا يستثنى من جواز النفل جالسا بلا عذر شيء على صحيح لأنه صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يصلي بعد الوتر. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام used to sit after witr قائدا, sat down to pray salah. وكان يجلس في عامة صلاته بالليل. He would, as I already mentioned to you, for most of his night prayers, his qiyamul layl, he would stay in a seated position. Why? تخفيفا, in order not to burden himself, because it was a long night. وفي رواية عن Aisha, this is probably the same riwayah, and there is a narration from Aisha رضي عنها, فلما أراد أن يركع, when he intended to make ruku, قام, he stood up. فقرأ آيات, he would recite some verses. ثم ركع, then he would make ruku. وسجد, then he would make sajda. وعاد إلى القعود, and then he would return to sitting. وقال في المعراج الدراية وهو المستحب في كل الطوي بس يصلي قائدا. It's mustahab, he mentioned in معراج الدراية. That's not necessarily the muftabi position, so don't get carried away. موافقة للسنة ولو لم يقرأ حين استوى قائما وركع وسجد أجزاء أو لم يستوي قائما وركع لا يجزي لأنه لا يكون ركوعا قائما. What does that say here? ولم يقرأ حين استوى قائما وركع وسجد أجزاءه ولو لم يستوي قائما وركع لا يجزئه. If he did not stand and he made ruku, then it would not be sufficient for him لأنه لا يكون, because this is not ruku قائما ولا ركوعا قائدا كما في التجليس ولكن له أي المتنفل جالسا نصف أجر القائم. However, the person who prays nafil seated, he gets half the reward of a standing person. So why would you go for half the reward? Kyun? لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, because of the statement of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, من صلى قائما فهو أفضل. The person who prays standing is superior. ومن صلى قائدا, and as for the person who prays seated, obviously this is only for the sunnah غير مؤكدة. The person who prays seated, فله نصف أجر القائم, he gets half the reward of the standing person. ومن صلى نائما, and that person who prays, I don't think this means asleep, prays lying down, فله نصف أجر القائد. هذا في حقه القادر العاجز. This is obviously a person who is هذا في حقه القادر. This is with regards to a person who is able. As for a person who is unable, does he get a reduction in his reward? He's unable. من عذر, due to some reason, فصلاته بالإيماء, then his salah is superior with indication of the law, better min salat al-qa'im, than a person who is standing and making ruku and making sajda. لأنه جهد النفل, sorry, I just misread that. لأنه جهد المقل والإجماع منعقد على أن صلاة القائد بعذر مساوية لصلاة القائم في الأجر كذا في الدراية. قلت بل هو أرقى منه لأنه أيضا جهد المقل. I think that says. Okay, my eyes are going. I'm getting late. ونية المرء خير من عمله. And that brings us to that point. Allahu Akbar. Is still people here? Are people going to sleep? Right. Oh, there's still people here, mashallah. People are here, yeah. So we can carry on. The night is young, eh? Let's see what questions we got left. Regarding moving the head whilst praying, I assume the ruling is the same for praying on an airplane as well when you cannot stand up and pray. Sorry for stating the obvious. The issue with the praying on the plane is that you are capable of praying. The capability is not due to your space. The capability is due to the person. قادر عليه. Yani, do you have capacity? So we can pray. The problem we have is we're not allowed to pray. So there's different opinions as to what you should do here. Some people say you should imitate the people who pray and then repeat that salah when you land on the ground, because you have to make qiyam, you have to make ruku, you have to make sajda when you are capable of doing it. We are capable of doing it. We have no uzr. The only uzr is obviously they won't allow us to pray. So fard prayer has to be prayed standing. So that is one option that we have. I'm not going to enter into the conversation of Jama Baina Salatayn. It's too late in the night. Also, Mufti, did you manage to look into the topic of buying off-plan properties through istisna? Yeah, I answered that question, Muslim astronaut, on the very same day. The very same day. So I don't know when you ask this, whichever day you ask this, um, I will. It's on there, my brother. Whatever you asked it is, I answered it there later on. Still here. Good. I expected you to be here, otherwise you're in trouble. You can sit here all night on a chair. 100% you can sit all night on a chair. I see these people, I have no envy, but I see them, reclining and supping on water and, stretching their legs, stretching their arms and say, right, here we go. Another rakat coming up. Allahu Akbar. Let's not push ourselves too much. How are you feeling it when you're sat on a chair? Wala hawla wala quwwata. Don't get me started on the chair again. Anyway, let me finish these last few questions. But I hope I've done that good justice, that one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I hope you're well. I would like clarification regarding the correct method of following the Imam in congregational salah at the time of the final salam. When the Imam completes the shahud and begins the salam, should the follower begin their salam immediately after the Imam says first Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah? Or should the follower wait until the Imam completes both salams to the right and left and then begin their own salam? In other words, what is the correct and preferred way of following the Imam in this specific part of the prayer? I would appreciate a detailed explanation so the prayer may be performed correctly in accordance with the Sunnah. So if memory serves me well, Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion is that when the Imam does his salam, you follow him. So in every action, Imam Abu Hanifa's view is that you imitate him almost immediately upon being aware of his action. Right? The Sahibain would say, allow the Imam to complete the action and then imitate him. So this is just their interpretation of what a follower is, a follower of an Imam. Imam Abu Hanifa's view is that if you are a true follower of the Imam, when as soon as you hear him say Assalamu alaikum, then you're following him. Right? You should follow him. The Sahibain's view was that you can only follow somebody when his action is complete. Otherwise, you're not really following. So it's just semantics. So if we adopt the Hanafi position, then we would say we follow Imam Abu Hanifa's position, that when he completes an action, we follow that through. And that, I believe, is it. Okay, so my esteemed, hold on. Assalamu alaikum. If I've collected coins in a sadaqah box, do I have to physically give those coins in charity, or can I just transfer the equivalent money online to a charity, then reuse the coins? Wa alaikum salam. Yes. Well, you don't have to physically give those coins in charity because they're not specified. You've not made them takhassus that this is it, because these are things which are have imitations. They're replaceable. So what you do is you just transfer the money, sister. Okay, that will suffice. Jazakallah Mustafa for the session you're running, very beneficial. Alhamdulillah, barak lafiq. The first questions by the individual on stocks and shares. Robert, sorry, just catching up. If it is a Sharia compliant firm and then intention is long-term wealth building on the zakat date, is only the amount above what has been invested zakatable, i.e. if the invested 1K to date in the fund and the fund value, if he was to withdraw, is 1.5K, would he pay? No, because if this is for long-term, he's invested in this and he's not going to touch this. This is going to grow for the next 10 to 15 years. He has no near of selling it. He's saying, I'm not going to sell it. Of course, if the shares suddenly go through the roof, I may consider selling it, but my near is not to sell it. My near is to keep withdrawing dividends from it. It's like a house that is going to go on rent and I'm going to take rent. It is like a car that I'm going to lease out and I'm going to get returns on it. So if he's got that mindset, like I've got a house that I'm going to put on rent and get returns, or I've got a car that I'm going to put, see, think of it like this. If I buy a car and I just want to sell the car on, I'm going to fix it up and sell it on, then my niyyah is not to lease this car out. My niyyah with this asset is to, get the most out of it. Similarly, if I buy a house and I fix it up, I decorate it, I, put some cables in and I, do what I need to do and I sell it, then that my maqsad wasn't necessarily to, lease it out or to put it out for rent. So this is the same with this type of asset. So if you've got these shares in stocks and the maqsad is that I want to keep these because I know they produce nice dividends, and I'm just going to take the dividends because they give dividends, I don't know, once a year or twice a year, and it's quite healthy, it's quite decent, and I'm going to keep them for the next 5-10 years. Then you're only giving zakat on the dividends when you add them to your nisab date to any of the wealth you have. Of course, if you spend the dividend by taking out your ulama friends, if you take your ulama friends out, which you should be doing at the end of Ramadan, and you spend all the dividend, then there's no zakat due, because when your nisab date comes up, the dividend is spent. But if obviously you're only buying the shares and kind of like thinking my niyat is to sell them, I'm just waiting for the right opportunity to sell them, I'm going to sell them, then obviously you should give it on the total value really there, because that is what the zakatable asset is. So the total value. So when you're doing this in terms of the dividends or the long term, then only that which is zakatable assets within the zakat you give. Whereas when you're going to sell, then it's on the total. So that's the difference. So the dividends and the zakatable assets, if you've got them for long term, and if it's something which is you're going to buy to sell, then the total amount. How do you work out zakatable assets? It is everything within the business of that stock or the share which is zakatable. We've already been through this: raw materials, end product, materials going through process, liquid cash, anything, whatever. And a proxy of around 30% is given if people can't work that out. So basically, if you've got these for long term, that you're going to keep them for 10 years, you work out, so the value of the share is £10,000. You work out 30% of that, which is £3,000, and you give 2.5% of that. And if there's any dividends, you add that to it as well. That clears that up. Yeah, I hope I've cleared that up with the difference between the zakatable assets for those which are long term and the total amount for those which are short term. Is the marriage project still accepting donations? And since it doesn't appear on the website, I can only accept. Yes, it is still. So you can just make a transfer and say wedding marriage project. That is still going on. All those projects are ongoing. Sometimes links die down, sometimes links become live, but we're still carrying on with all the projects that we've discussed before, inshallah. Right, well, that was a long one, wasn't it? SubhanAllah. You just can't predict you people. Sometimes you guys are never around. I'm talking to myself, and other days you just won't let me go to sleep. So I think we've reached a point there, inshallah. So tomorrow we'll be back to, hold on, there's some of the messages. What are these? So tomorrow we will be back, inshallah, with our normal guidance for the guided. That session will run, and we will hopefully have that till the end of this week. Next week, I'm planning to travel down to London, inshallah. So if you are London based, then do look out for any messages that might go out on our socials to see where we will be. One of the key places that I will be in is in Masjid Umar, inshallah, in Walthamstow. So, if you live in that part of the world, then you can pop by, inshallah. We'll see you there. Otherwise, I will be sort of, moving around a little bit across London, inshallah, visiting a few places and hopefully eating some splendid food, which of course will never reach the standards of Bradford, but hey, you can only try, can't you, chaps? You can only try. So on that note, wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.